Hello, welcome to today's astrology study group. And we will go through some retrograde discussion. Retrograde energy, what does it mean? Retrograde planets in your natal chart, and how can we most benefit from this energy and understand it within ourselves and within others. So there's quite a lot to unpack. So I'm going to dive right in. So this is a picture of um it's a photoshopped image of what a like each this would be like giving you just a little bit more. It's not totally like this, but like if we were looking at one of the inner planets, Mercury or Venus, um and you might see it track, okay, in its orbit. You can see, like, let's just pretend it's starting from the very upper left, and then it would be like each night close to when it'd be a retrograde. So you can see that the planet's movement is, like when we go look at the charts, it'd be like 9 degrees, 10 degrees, 11 degrees, 12 degrees, however far in space. And then it hits to a certain point, and that far right hand point right before it turns around would be the first retrograde. I mean, when the planet apparently turns retrograde. And so let me just clear up here. Planets don't go backwards in space. It's just a phenomenon, from our perspective on Earth, the way it moves around the sun. And I was trying to find a good video, but I couldn't find one right now. Maybe when I come across one. I know that there's some out there that actually show that. But anyway, there's a lot of them there, but I think they confuse me more. They could confuse you more. I've seen a couple just over time, but nonetheless, the planet is moving over, and then when it reaches this far side, like up here where my cursor is, if you can see that, otherwise it's the far right hand side, before it looks like it's going back the other way. That's when it would be the retrograde turnaround from our perspective. And then it goes back, it goes to a certain point, and then it does the next turnaround, and that's the where it turns direct. And then it moves forward until it's on forward. So what does it mean, the shadow period? Well, this period, right when it's like between it's this time right in here when the planet hits whatever degree this is, because that's where it lines up here. And if you don't see my cursor, I'm not sure if you do, right when that planet aligns up with how far it retrogrades back, because it's going to retrograde back to that degree. Let's just say, like, just for point of reference, each of these dots, let's say the very first dot, on the upper left is like, say, 1 degree. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about at the seventh one, we'll say. So like whatever retrograde this is, let's just say its shadow period begins at 7 degrees of whatever. And then we go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe like 16 degrees would be then where it would turn retrograde. And then it goes back. And instead of going 17, 18, 19, 20, because it's going backward in degrees. So it would go 16, like 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Or 7, because we said that was 7. So that would retrograde all the way back to 7 degrees. And then as it turned around, then it would start going forward again. That would be 7 again. So it'd be like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, we said. So its shadow period, it's got from its whole cycle is from 8 to 16. And that's all like used ground. So as soon as it hits 8 or 7, what we said, it's like as soon as if we're looking at this as a reference, as soon as it hit that, say, 7 degree mark, as we're saying, these are all 1 degree. In this first one, we're saying it starts at 1. We're just giving it just some reference. So we would say this planet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So from 7 degrees, and then it hits 16, and then it goes retrograde back to 7, and then it doesn't get out of in that shadow zone. It doesn't get out of shadow until 16 degrees, and then it starts moving into new territory. So that is known as the shadow. So it hits it on the coming in, it hits it like at 7, then it starts to be it's going over, it's like, say, foreshadow the shadow. It's going over where it's going to retrograde. So when it's first going through, before it hits that first retrograde, that is going into it's what's going to be its shadow period. I hope you understand that. It's what is going to be its shadow, because it's going to go retrograde back to that first, that degree there. Okay, and then it's not going to move out of that shadow till the degree of where it actually turned around. So we're just saying, from this little perspective, its shadow period is like from 7 to 16 degrees. So that being said, excuse me, this is how it would look in space if we were, I mean, in the sky, if we were to say to take a, time lapse picture, or have a time lapse photography for all these many days, we would actually see the planet shifting or turning, from our point of view, and then go ahead and moving forward again. So this is kind of just a bit of a over exaggerated look, but I think it's one of the clearest things that, the illustrations that can show you how a retrograde looks in the sky from our perspective, without confusing you too bad. So, okay, got that out. Whew. So what does that mean? I'm just gonna let that up. I'm gonna just talk a few things. There's a few things that I found. A lady named Molly's astrology.com. She's got some cool stuff. And some of the things that she was pointing out to was, if there's a retrograde planet in your birth chart, you can experience the planet in a more subjective, internal way, because it's not, it's not the outward expression of the planet. It tends to be more internal. So you express that planet's energies in a unique way, different from the rest of your family, or from the rest of a lot of people. It comes from within, not from without. And we're going to look at a few people, some of the charts, and then we can just look at Mercury, just because that's easy to see. So when, like, Mercury is either retrograde or behind the sun, I mean, it could be, we'll get there, but it may be behind the sun, but not retrograde. But nonetheless, it gives you a different perspective when a planet is in front of the sun or behind the sun, especially if it's an inner planet. All right, with Venus retrograde in your natal chart, your aesthetic tastes and values could come from something a little bit different. It may not be the norm, put it that way. If Mercury's retrograde in your it's a retrograde in your natal chart, your thinking could be different. Your sense of humor. I'm gonna go over these in a few different ways. I'm just gonna give you some highlights and then go deeper. With Jupiter, your ethics or morality or religion may be different. So a little bit more about retrograde Mercury. We'll just kind of run through a little first shot, then I'll give you another author's perspective. So retrograde Mercury, these people absorb thoughts and ideas through repetition and osmosis, rather than careful, deliberate study. Let me read that again. People with Mercury retrograde tend to absorb thoughts and ideas through repetition and osmosis, rather than careful, deliberate study. It's not your most studious student. They'll either get it by osmosis, they just have that intuitive pick up on it, or they have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, kind of. All right, constantly editing or reviewing or rethinking or replaying is in their mind. They may question what others accept as gospel. They may be contrary. It's like, well, I don't know about that. They may be more capable of dealing with abstractions and impressions, because the Mercury's not tracking, forward logical Mercury, or, it's like coming in a little differently. So maybe I like that one, more capable of dealing with abstractions and impressions. A retrograde Venus has a unique ideas regarding pleasure, beauty, and love, less concerned for their social amenities. They may seek unconventional styles or friends and partners. Retrograde Mars is less competitive than usual Mars energy, and often in competition with themselves. They tend to internalize their anger and leak it out rather than express it directly. Definitely, like, if you, especially if you have Mars in a fire sign, it's like direct, comes right out. Um, Mars retrograde women often choose men who are dependent, troubled, irresponsible, or social misfits. Isn't that interesting? Outer planet retrogrades. Outer planets are retrograde roughly 5 months out of the year, so they're often found in people's birth charts. So retrograde Jupiter, these people are capable of taking advantage of opportunities that others ignore or pass by. They prefer to take another crack at things that others have tried and failed. Their ethical or religious or their philosophies or moral codes might be their own, for good or bad. They seek answers from within rather than subscribing to the dogma of the outside world. They seek abundance in new and untried and unproven areas. So, they want to expand, that Jupiter expansion, but in an inward or in a different way, not just following the path that all the other fish are swimming. Retrograde Saturn, these people may doubt their worthiness. They may have low self-confidence. They may avoid taking responsibility, because, retrograde Saturn, it's all about all that, right? So they may lack that. They may avoid taking responsibility for their mistakes, or they may be fearful of taking chances. There's often a subconscious fear of maybe being rejected or of loss. Their limitations and burdens are self-imposed. She thinks this might be the most difficult retrograde planet. Retrograde Uranus. Here's a natural born rebel. Strong reformer instincts. For everybody else, these folks have a strong inner need and desire to persistently test their personal abilities against those of others. They may constantly try to prove themselves to themselves, and in seeking greater freedom for themselves, they may limit the freedom of others. Hey, get out of my way. They have a need of driving, maybe a need for speed. Retrograde Neptune. These people may be confused inwardly as to whether or not virtue, or if they're virtuous or not. They may be persistently seek help from others, whether their help is wanted or not. I kind of tend to think sometimes people tend to give them advice, whether they're asking or not. They just seem to, people give them advice. It's like, I didn't ask you that, but thank you. They're more susceptible and more easily taken in by others. Pluto retrograde, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but this is just a bit because this just went retrograde yesterday, actually. But that's just right now. Nearly half the world's population has this retrograde. Its effect is hard to determine, except to say that these people generally have a harder time in integrating themselves into the mainstream of society. Because Pluto, all that plutonic energy is just so transformative. When Pluto is very strong, they find themselves doing things without understanding why. And then the retrograde ruler of the rising sign. If you have this, a Leo rising, you don't have to worry about that because sun never goes retrograde. Moon either. So retrograde ruler. So like if you have Venus, if you have Venus rising, then either you can say in Libra or Taurus, the ruler of Venus. What should I say? I should say go the other way around. If you've got like Libra rising, and then that would mean that your Venus, how do I say it? Either one, either Taurus rising points to Venus, and if you have Venus retrograde, or if you have Libra rising, and it can point there, let's just say that that's like going to put more doubt as your personal worth as an individual, whatever sign you're talking about, if it's Venus or like say you have Gemini rising, and then you might have Mercury retrograde. Okay, so something like that. You're very concerned. That could be concerned with their self-image, or they could also be late bloomers. What else on retrograde planets? Let's see. The retrograde effects register on the plane of activity that is expressed by the element of the sign that planet is found in. So if it's an earth sign, it's the physical plane. And air would be intelligence or mental activity. Water sign, it would be more emotions, and fire, it would be more passion or ideals or motivation. While retrograde planets do not deny, they do delay events in our lives. When you have had lots of them in your chart, you go the long way to find your path. If you have no retrogrades, your path is closer to a straight line. You usually know what you want, um, usually know what you want to do when you grow up, and you do it, kind of. Or you, if you don't know, you just still act on a path of just more straightforward determinism. All right. What else do I want you to know about those? I think that's about it on that. So let's go through. I'm just going to have you look at that because I'm just going to go through some things. So you can either close your eyes or look at that chart. I found some cool stuff from Cafe Astrology, and there, I like to go henpeck and look at some of this information. They've got a lot of good stuff, and I know you might have already looked at that. And if you haven't, it's cafeastrology.com. A lot of good stuff there. Let's see what else I want. All right, so planets and bodies can appear to be moving backward in the sky, but they're not. It appears, from our perspective, we know that. So Mercury retrograde turns retrograde more frequently than any other planet, but the outer planets are retrograde more often than Mercury. And then I think you remember, and I'll remind you, Mercury can never be more than 28 degrees from the sun. And we'll see on some of these, like, if we start looking at how far Mercury is away, usually it's like it turns retrograde at, like, I've looked, it depends on the orbit of the planet and things, but it's, sometimes like 16 degrees. And then the whole cycle might be, well, we'll just go look. Anyway, it can never be more than 28 degrees from the sun. So that means it's barely, in somebody's chart, the only aspects that it can make are a conjunction or an almost semi-sextile. A semi-sextile, if it's at the furthest away, it can be 28, but it's not always. It doesn't always go to 28 before it starts retrograding, back. That's what I was saying. And sometimes it's like 16 degrees or 18, maybe 20 before it moves back, depending on the sign. So it's not even a semi-sextile. It's mainly either a conjunction or not anything to the sun, just to the sun. All right. Venus and Mars are retrograde about 7 to 10% of the time. And then Jupiter through Pluto are retrograde for larger periods of time. We know Jupiter can go about 9 months. Saturn can be 7.5 months between retrograde cycles, I should say. Venus is 1.5 years. It's like 18 months before, it takes that long for it to go through its retrograde cycle. We're going to have one this August. I think, is it August? No, I think maybe I'll have to look again. It goes into Leo, and I think it's in July when it actually hits there. We'll look. What else was I going to say? And then Mercury it's retrograde for 21 days, and it's about every 3 months. So we have 3 Mercury retrogrades a year. And interesting, this year, all the Mercury retrogrades are in Earth signs. We started out, I think I had that for you. We started out over in, there you go. Don't I want you to see? We started out over in the very first of the year, and I'll try to show that to you when we go back over to the charts. But I'm trying to remember, it was actually on December 29th that it started it. So it was just, a day before the end of the year. So it retrograded, and it was in Capricorn. And then now this next one, as you know, is in Taurus, and then we'll get one in Virgo, and then we get to the end of the year again. So Mercury, when somebody has that in their chart, it's like its energies are inward. They're often felt more strongly, but sometimes there's something about that planet's energies that keeps the native, it keeps hidden, or they keep something hidden or undercover. They could be shy, or they could be uncomfortable or awkward about, something in that communication, or it might be quirky, or they might think differently, or they might have a really odd sense of humor. Sometimes there's denial or something lacking or something missing, maybe in early childhood. There could be delays associated with the retrograde planet's energies. Perhaps for a Saturn retrograde person, there was a lack of discipline or structure. Maybe an authority figure was figured into their childhood somehow. Or the native could feel awkward in a situation that calls for rules. We're talking about Saturn. On the flip side, there may have been overly strict influences in the youth. They could be guilty. They could feel guilty or worried about excessively meeting their responsibilities, or how others think of them, or how to play by the rules. What else do I want to? Oh, these are good. Actually, I'll give you. Let's go through another one. Another example could be with Uranus retrograde prominent in a chart. There could have been in the childhood. There may have been a lack of freedom and maybe too many rules, or uniqueness and eccentricities were not encouraged, so that the native's expression of these things in adulthood is inhibited, choppy, and basically doesn't come out naturally. With retrograde Venus, perhaps the child was discouraged in some way when he or she was expressing loving feelings, or attempted to make themselves more attractive, or possibly there was a lack of money and resources. All right, it can come out in a lot of different ways. So more on Mercury, because it happens 3 times a year. So when Mercury's retrograde, the thinking processes are generally more acute, because you have to try harder. It's not just flowing naturally. You got to process it differently. So the sense of humor could be rather quirky or unusual, or you see things from a different perspective. People with Mercury retrograde take in information differently than those with Mercury direct. There's about 18% of people that have Mercury retrograde in their chart. I guess that's as like of all the, I don't know how they can tell that statistic. Maybe of all the some sort of stat that's run on most of the charts, or I guess, yeah, how could you even tell that? Because you don't know when everybody's born. Anyway, some people with this position struggle with doubts about their perceptions or their ability to learn. And there can be a lot of thinking or double checking, reviewing of thoughts and ideas before communicating them. Venus at retrograde, if it's at birth, the feeling nature is usually deep. Socializing, there we go, is taken seriously and rarely lightly. They can be somewhat shy, or self-confidence could be waning. There could be an awkwardness felt concerning small talk and social graces, maybe an aversion for superficialities too. Love is extremely important to a person with retrograde Venus, but they may not be explicit about it enough for others to know just how deeply they can feel. There's always more to this person that meets the eye, but the problem there is they may not know how to express that. And that's what that's what they're going to be working through this lifetime. Their love life, sometimes their financial life, can be hidden in some manner. People born under Venus retrogrades have to watch for self-sabotage in love relationships. There may be an underlying feeling of not being good enough, or attractive enough, or lovable enough, or something there, some kind of insecurities, self-love on some level. Fears can lead them to overcompensate, such as overeat or serial date or whatever. They could have the opposite effect, or it could have the opposite effect where the person tells himself, I don't need love. Oh, I don't need that. Yeah, so that's, or in the money issues, could be worthiness about accepting money, about asking enough for what you do, for having the self-worth to, not you're undercutting and underbidding yourself maybe. Mars retrograde would be an issue there for kind of with standing up for yourself or asserting yourself. You may, maybe you don't want to be challenged. You want to avoid conflict. It could stimulate fears of being ineffective. You might have a roundabout way of going after your desires, not real direct. The desire nature runs deep, but often misunderstood. Timing could be off, or you could express your desires or anger like in bursts rather than more smooth flowing. You could tend to keep things to yourself, and then you let them build up until you explode. And that's kind of a Mars retrograde symptom, and then depends on what sign as well. You may come on too strong sometimes, and then not strong enough at others. Oftentimes thinking that, of the what you should have done later. You're like, oh crap, why did I do that? Or I should have done that, when you're no longer under pressure. See, because you don't like the conflict. So it makes you go under conflict. Like, I don't know. I get all tongue tied and twisted. I just can't do it. So you might come up, or you could come up with very creative ways of expressing yourself physically as you mature, or you can channel that energy into unusual but effective areas quite effectively. Yeah, that could be a toughie. Just being comfortable with moving your energy forward, getting what you want, going after what you want. All right, Jupiter retrograde in natal could have a different or unusual perspectives or belief systems or sets of morals. They could prefer to learn from their own experiences and reactions to them rather than from others. It's like, don't tell me, I want to do it. Because they don't intrinsically have faith in being lucky. They are planners who worry about their future or consequences of their actions more than others. So they may need to learn that they deserve what others might naturally feel entitled to. More about worth there, right? Saturn, there can be a little bit more usual experiences of guilt and self-doubt. Um, Fears are internalized. They may have to put on a brave front so that others don't see them as vulnerable. There can also be a strong fear of letting others down or not fulfilling their responsibilities or their obligations. Essentially, making poor choices. I'm gonna let somebody down. Oh no. Sometimes the childhood was not very disciplined or orderly. In some ways, having Saturn retrograde in a chart can tend to function much like a strong Uranus. So they kind of, inhibit the one, because that whole Saturn Uranus dance there, where the native is uncomfortable with overly orderly or disciplined life. People born with Saturn retrograde might feel especially anxious or nervous when they're in situations that call for protocol or etiquette or a specific set of standards and rules. Oh no. Uranus retrograde can point to a fear of change or a latent mistrust of new technologies or improvements. I tell you, I go with that. I have Uranus retrograde, and I definitely mistrust this AI stuff, all these devices, being plugged in, letting other people think for me. Like, these people might hide their eccentricities, while Uranus direct natives are more inclined to flaunt them, or at least to be proud of them. In some ways, having Uranus retrograde is like having Saturn strong in the chart. And there can be pent up energy with this position, so that while they may be following rules for some time, at a certain point they may burst out with a fit of rebellion before going back to a more orderly, law abiding lifestyle. It's like, this sucks, this isn't right. And then it gets straightened out. All right, Neptune retrograde. Oh gosh, this can go deep. Anyway, they tend to hide their vulnerabilities, their spiritual side, or their compassion. Or they may feel sort of uncomfortable expressing that. These things can well exist, and that runs deep, but Neptune retrograde natives prefer to keep things private. Keep things to themselves. They're not real self-revealing. They're not the one to just, tell you everything. Deep faith can be missing, or they may tend to be mistrustful of things. When left to fill in the blanks, they may expect the worst. There can be a big fear of dreaming too big, and they're afraid of being let down, or they just kind of anticipate, or it's like, oh man, I'm not gonna put a whole lot into this because I don't want to be disappointed. Yeah, they could be. I think also that Neptunian nature, it could be like they could doubt themselves. They could doubt their inner abilities a lot of times, or how empathic they really are, or right on. They could like blurt out things that are truthfully going to happen because they're not really thinking about it. They just like, oh, this is going to happen, because they're not real connected to it. Pluto retrograde in a chart, they tend to be fear of being controlled or manipulated or betrayed by others. There may be a tendency to keep these fears themselves or exposing them to make them feel more vulnerable. They don't as readily let others know their desire for power or control, and they may not be in touch with this desire a lot of the time. So there's a lot more on all of these, but this just kind of gives you a little idea on how these things can be uh, how do I say it? Identified and then worked with. If you think of the nature of the planet and then see that it's not expressing itself that way, and it would either be kind of over or under. It could be under expressing it or it could be over expressing it. So that also depends on, of course, what sign it's in, what house it's in, and what aspects it's making. So we'll look at a few things in a minute. So I want to give you a new share, and let's look at, I think this is the one I want here. All right. A planet ephemeris. Okay, so we're going to just look at an ephemeris, and I'm just going to look at mine and say, I'm going to show you. Oh, go back. And let me just make sure that you're seeing this. Hold on. Go screen. Okay, so you should be seeing April 1964 in the ephemeris. And then we're just going to look at Mercury. So we're going to see the very first column is the sun, and then the moon, and then Mercury. And I'm born on the 6th, so we see it's here like at 5 degrees of Taurus. And it's direct, and we'll just kind of look down and we'll just look for when it turns retrograde. And we can see on this ephemeris, it turns red. So on the 17th of April, if I was born on the 6th, we're 11 days later, we see, get the column right here, the 17th, it goes retro, it turns retrograde because you can see it slowing down here at 11 degrees, right? Because it was kind of clipping along. Here's like, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, it's starting to go the other way. 10, 9, 8. Okay, so you can see that. So you could say, whoever this is, this person, well, me, but this person was born when Mercury was just at the end of its, it's like just reaching there, the end of that 11 degrees, the end of that cycle. So it's just after, it's like it was just a few days off on its leash, going a little bit more, and then yank, and then it turns retrograde. And see, like here, well, let's just look at this. So if I can go down, I'm have to go into May. So remember, what do we say, the 17th? So that's like for 3 weeks, so 14. So it'll probably be like, if I do my math, I can't think right now. Anyway, I'll just look. Okay, so here we go all the way through April, and it's going back to 5 degrees. You can see, look, it's starting to slow down, the retrograde. It's going 11, 11, 12, 5, 6, and let's go forward one. I want it to go 1 month. All right, let me just make sure you got this one. Okay, so May, you can see that it's going here 4, 3, 2, 1. It's going here. And it's like right at 1 degree. You can see that slowing down, and it's like it retrograded right over to 1 degree, and it turned around, still stayed in Taurus, and then it started back. You can see it coming this way. So yeah, it was like right at the 10th. So it should have been like 21 days of approximately. All right, so it's okay. So it's shadow period. So it didn't get out of its shadow when it was like, what did it go? It won't get out of its shadow till the end of the month here, until the end of May. We'll look at that in real time, but you can just see that. So when you're looking at progressed charts, this is important. If you don't know progressions, don't worry about it. But when you're looking at a progressed chart, we're looking at, because like if I'm looking at this soul, I'm going to go back a second. Well, you already know that day in April, what was it, the 17th or something, when it changed. So if I was born on the 6th, then the 17th, so that was like when I was 11 years old, there was something um, that happened, or something, that changed, something with my Mercury, something with communication that didn't happen, that turned inner, that was like, what happened there? And the only thing I can really think of right about that time is I got glasses. I couldn't see. And it was, there stopped some communication, because I couldn't see. So I had to have glasses. And that was after an illness. We could probably find that too. But nonetheless, and then it would be in, Taurus, that's kind of like in the head area still. But anyway, that's just interesting how you can see that, and it's interesting to know what part of the cycle you were born in. So you can look in any chart, and you can, I mean, any ephemeris, and you can go look when you were born, and then you can see um, where the retrogrades are and when they turn direct. Like if you look over here at Uranus, you can see that it's been retrograde here, and it turns direct at 5 degrees. You can see how it's stationary here at all May. It's hanging stationary because when I was born, it was retrograde, of course, because it takes a while, but then it turns direct. And it was the 14th here. So it's like, when did, like in my life, I would ask what year that was, and what, that would definitely mark a year. That would be maybe something with feeling more outward or spontaneous, or freedom, something to do with freedom, something. So I'd have to go back. I can't remember at the moment, but I'm just looking at, you can see when these turn direct or turn retrograde. So you can look at an ephemeris, and you'll see that, and count the days is per year to get an idea of what year, how old you were, to be able to do that. Okay. So that's how you look up those cycles, and you can see where you were born in the cycle, and when it changed it, and you can go backward and forward to see, when it started. It's like if you were born into a retrograde cycle, you would then look back a month or whatever, if you were born in the beginning of the month, and see when it started. So you're like, how far into the cycle were you born? Because those cycles repeat. When we're starting to look at this in the progress chart, you only get so many cycles and things per lifetime, and it makes a difference when certain areas to move forward, and then other times to sit back and reflect, and to get what you can and gain, and get rid of stuff, and then move forward again when you should, and then come back and reserve. And it's always this push pull in different parts of life. All right, let's go to, let's look at this. Let's say new share. Let's look at some charts. This is Edgar Allan Poe, and I just wanted to just throw up a few charts. Isn't that weird? To put up a few charts and look at the sun and Mercury in this person. And I happen to have the inner aspects set to the quintiles, just FYI. Those are those odd degrees, that interesting degree that points to a real creative potential. So that's really cool. Look how interesting this. Anyway, with him, we have the sun and Mercury exact. Look at that. See, so this looks like, we could, I can't do it on this, in this program right here. So I'm not sure where it was in its cycle. So it looks like, it's direct because it's not R, and it's about to pass over his sun. So he was born in, when they call it Kazini. This would be, it may be the superior conjunction. It may have been already retrograded, and then it's going forward now, and it's maybe going over his sun. So that's probably what it is. So that's interesting. In that deep dark Capricorn, the end of Capricorn. Look at that Poe. Wow. All right, let's look at another chart. I think you can see this. This is Johnny Carson. Let me make sure you see that one. And if we look at, you always go look for the sun, because you'll find Mercury not far from the sun. So go sun hunting. When you look, when I put up a chart, go kind of zone in on that sun. So he has that sun, right there. Is his rising energy, but it's in the 12th house. That's it. I think that's just really interesting. But then Mercury is in his first house, in Scorpio, right on his ascendant. So that he's going to be very keen, and he's got that Scorpio rising. Ooh, But look at that sun, that late sun in Libra. Whoa. That's what made him such a good host. He'd get along with people and people loved him. He was just such a friendly, fun kind of person. But that Mercury right there. So the Mercury for him is ahead of the sun. It's in the next sign. Even though this is what's confusing, you see the sun rising, and they're moving that way. Mercury is still in the next sign. It's, 11 degrees ahead of the sun. All right. We'll just keep looking at people. Uh, Let's actually, I want to look at this one is George Carlin. And let's look at his son. He's got, I don't know, somehow I picked a lot of Tauruses. You'll notice I have it in both programs. I picked for some reason. It was just crazy. Maybe we're in Taurus time. I don't know. But here's George Carlin, 21 Taurus. Look at that. And then he's got Mercury behind his sun, just a little, and it's retrograde. So it just passed it going backwards. It just Cassini'd, Cassini is the heart of the sun. So you can see it's retrograde. So it's in this retrograde motion here. So interesting, he totally saw things from a different point of view. He was so clever and funny, and the way he went about it was totally unusual. You can see that not only was it retrograde, but it's behind the sun as well. I think if it's ahead of the sun, we've got one type of meaning. If it's behind the sun, of course, things have a different type of meaning. So he definitely was a deep thinker, and he put a lot of stuff together. And he listened to any of his stuff. He was deep. He was clever, and he knew a lot too. He investigated. But anyway, this was very interesting. And look how close Uranus is to this whole thing. Bringing that unusualness into the mix. Yeah. All right. There's Carol Burnett, and she was another comedian. I wanted to see like these people's Mercury, because they're comedians. And so with her, she's her Mercury is behind the sun. Her sun is in Taurus. Look at there. I kept grabbing these Taurus. And then she has it's direct though. So it's must been retro back here, and then it's coming forward. We see it coming over, it's coming forward. So it's behind her sun, and it gave her another unusual perspective. She was very funny as well. And, to had this, I think this is interesting to look at, like some of these kind of classical funny or people like that. But Johnny Carson, he was fast, and he was zinging stuff in. He was just like quick, boom, quick witted. And you could see that with, Mercury ahead of the sun, and there in Scorpio, where these people, they're actors as well as comedians. Carol Burnett, she had several things as her career progressed. Singing, acting, being funny. Yeah. I did want to I wanted to look at Robert Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Jr. He's in the news now. He's running for president on a Democratic ticket. I like a lot of things this guy's saying. Look at all those, just interesting, all these quintiles in here. Kind of a magical part. Look at all of that. Interesting. But nonetheless, let's go back to our topic. Just couldn't help but see that. So look at this. Interesting, kind of like Edgar Allan Poe. Poe had it, the sun conjunct, Mercury conjunct the sun, but his is ahead of it. Actually, we should go look in there a second to see if that is right. Well, actually, we I just have to note this birth time is, I don't know the birth time, so it could be just a little bit off. It's not gonna move that much in a day, but yeah, no, it's not going to be back that far. It's still ahead of the sun, because it's almost to 29 degrees and the sun was 27. And I put it at noon, so it wouldn't be that far back if it were. But it's going forward. So look how close that is. And he's really, serious matters. No, whatever, if we got Mercury conjunct the sun in Capricorn, we got some serious thinking, serious matters. It'd be fun to compare the chart. Is this because those two are so close together? But he's got Venus there right on the other side of the sun. And this is kind of interesting that the sun is almost like the midpoint between these. So he's got those, that niceness and that, how would I say, it seemed like a very compassionate degree. Okay. Let's just look at a couple world leaders. We'll look at George W. Bush. Just wanted to see him. I don't know why. Just just say, when I'm going through some of the charts, sometimes there's lists and lists, and other times that one leads me to think of another. But I just wanted to see what his was. And his Mercury is ahead of the sun. It's there in Leo. So it's for him, I think it was, all that stuff there in Leo there, it kind of made him definitely have that entitled feeling for sure. And it's like right there, conjunct Pluto. Whoa. Okay. And let's look at Donald Trump, just because he's in the news as well. And he has his Mercury also ahead of the sun. So a lot of people that are, in politics, I think um, I don't know, movers and shakers in some area. We'll have to do a comparison of like politicians and stuff, and maybe look at that sometime. But the ones that I pulled up, have the Mercury ahead of the sun. Okay. I think I have one more group of people. Let's see, do I have this one? A couple more people, and then we'll be done. See if I had anybody else. Oh yeah. Let's get a new share. Hold on a minute. Let's do. Oh yeah, I know who I wanted to do. Another Taurus. Let's see. New share. Let's look at Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder. Another Sun and Mercury conjunction. And then his is ahead of the sun. And look at that, in Taurus. I told you I was picking the Taurus things, but look at the music. I mean, he just had that communication. But look at it's retrograde ahead of the sun. It's about to go. It's Cassini. It's combust. It's like right there. The sun is burning it out. It's about to go over the sun. You can see it right there. So he's got that. That middle hit of this retrograde here. All right. Let's see who else we got. Tucker Carlson, another Taurus, 25 Taurus, and then his Mercury's ahead of the sun, and he's very clever. Look at that; it's in its own sign. No wonder he's a journalist, investigative journalist, and born at the new moon, just a little, few minutes or an hour or so, an hours so later, the new moon there. So a new start. He was born with, and his feet were hitting the ground running, and then we got Mercury ahead of there. So that is a very, very nice, interesting chart. Who else I got called up here? Oh, just might as well. Nancy Pelosi. Uh, her Mercury is behind the sun. She's got that, Aries sun, and that, Mercury in Pisces retrograde. So I that the Aries sun has definitely landed her in the position, but she's not a good thinker. She's not a deep, clear, clever thinker at all. And it's definitely coming out in her older years. You can see how it's just mucking up. Retrograde, Mercury in Pisces retrograde. I think brain is just deteriorating as it gets older with this. It's just not heavy, hasn't been used to doing a lot of thinking hard, because it's in the intuitive sign. It tries to just get it by osmosis or just by rhetoric, what somebody's telling you. And then retrograde as well. It's just kind of like a not, I don't think it's the best placement for that. That's in its total, the retrograde of the end. It's sort of the end of the end, and it's behind the sun. So this is difficult, but it's I mean, that's why Mercury's never that far away from the sun. So the sun is here in Aries, kind of making up for that. This is sort of like, I don't know, to me it seems like a portrait of a bully, kind of. All right, let's look at another, kind of like the other. We'll look at Brandon. um and it's behind the sun in Scorpio, but he's not clever like Johnny Carson. Sorry. Yeah, that's again, I think the water signs just make the mind when it gets older not it's just too pliable. It doesn't have any stability. It's easy to dissolve. It's easier to yeah, break down. All right, a couple more. Let's look at Jack Nicholson because he was very funny and clever. And we see his Mercury in another Taurus, way ahead of the sun. Look at there's 20. It's just it's like 19 degrees, and it's just about it's probably going to get a little bit more. Then it's going to start its retrograde. Probably not too far, but yeah, he definitely was very sharp for this being in Taurus too. But very uh, he's just something else, with his humor and his wit and how his cleverness there. And Jim Morrison, I think we looked at him a while ago. I think he'll be on the last one. And he's got that Sagittarian sun, and then his Mercury is ahead of it in Capricorn. So that's what gave him that real deep thinker, the poetry, that serious to overtones. He just kind of got just like real serious. It seemed like about a lot of stuff. Wasn't very light. All right, and I think that will do it for today. Check out your own chart. Hope this gives you some information about retrograde planets. Dig in a little bit more. It's definitely something that you're. If we have those, look at what it is. We just basically kind of went over that, but look at what house it's in. Look at what aspects it's making to certain things, and know that when we do get those retrogrades, like when that does go retrograde again, every time something in that resonates, that will bring those issues up to you a little bit more. All right, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.